Hello, welcome to Public Advocate. I'm Shirley Graves, and we're going to be talking about the recent elections, the local races, the state races, the national races, and I am here with two contributors who are very knowledgeable about all of this, and they often come on Public Advocate to talk about the election results and the political situations. We're going to do the local news, the state races, and the national. And I have here on this side, I have Jack Wilkenson, who is a longtime local realtor. He's been president of the Marin Board of Realtors, and he's currently the chair of the Republican Central Committee. So he's going to be speaking on the Republican side of the issues. And on my right, I have Greg Brockbank, who is a longtime local attorney. He owns an operator of the Marin Law Center, and he's a longtime Democrat activist and former chairman of the Democratic Central Committee. So we have some very political, knowledgeable people here who are going to talk about the recent races, and we'll close by talking about what we think is going to happen in November when we have some big elections.
We've been doing this for what, 10, 15 years now, before and after every election? And
a long time, and we've tried to inform the people as to just exactly what went on and what's going to go on.
And just to be clear, we don't make this as clear as we should perhaps, is that although Jack is a rabid partisan Republican, I'm a rabid partisan Democrat, these races are all nonpartisan races, these local races, and we may agree on many or most of them. We'll see. When we get up to the national races and presidents, we're probably going to differ, wouldn't you say?
Right.
Significantly,
Yeah.
I suspect.
Well, you two have done it very nicely. You don't ever shake your fist at each other or anything like that.
We would shake hands after each show.
Yes, they're still friends after all these times that they've discussed the political situation here. So I think we could just go ahead and do it again.
Well, let's start with the local race.
Yeah,
I was saying just before the cameras rolled that this was surprisingly not as big a race not as many potential races as I thought there'd be, because this is the first year when all the local races have moved from odd-numbered years to even-numbered years, but most of them chose November instead of the primary. And so in the primary, always had a half dozen local races. Now they have a few more, but it's not that many more. And they weren't not all of them were contested as usual. Sometimes the same number of people filed as there were seats for that race, so that they weren't on the ballot.
Right.
So only a few were on the ballot. And none of them were terribly close. Most of us could have predicted at the close of filing what was going to happen, and it did. There were no surprises. The three supervisor races are always, by their nature, going to be the most important, but that doesn't mean there are any close races. One incumbent ran for re-election, another incumbent ran unopposed, so she wasn't even on the ballot, and one incumbent stepped down, but the leading candidate to replace her in Southern Marin, Stephanie Moulton Peters, replacing the retiring Kate Sears, was so popular and well known after 3 terms on the Mill Valley Council that she might as well have been an incumbent, and she won with 70-some% of the vote against her challengers.
And her two challengers were totally unfunded and unknown. Nobody knew them. And
Give or take the ads in the IJ by one of them.
yeah, but there wasn't enough.
No.
You know, I mean, you got a popular incumbency is almost a guarantee unless you really do something bad.
You'd have to be a really unpopular incumbent and a really strong challenger, and none of that was the case here. All the incumbents were, in the case of Stephanie Moulton Peters, almost incumbent, were reasonably popular, and none of the challengers, either the two for Stephanie Moulton Peters or the challenger to West Marin Supervisor Dennis Rodoni, was very strong. Alex Easton Brown has run in several races before, including this race, and never gotten much. He doesn't get money. He doesn't get endorsements. He just wants the platform, which is understandable. And it's better to have a race than not. It's good for the candidate. It's good for the people. It's good for our democracy. So it's good to have races, and it's a shame when they're unopposed. Even though they like it, they try not to admit it.
Wasn't one of the incumbents only in for a short time?
Good question. No, these were all 4-year terms.
Oh.
There are some 2-year seats.
No, I mean, they had been appointed in the...
Originally, both Katie Rice and Kate Sears were appointed about 10 years ago in the middle of the terms of their predecessors, both of whom died, Charles McGlashan, young, and Hal Brown, not as young. So they were appointed midterm, but then they've been elected twice since then.
Oh, there wasn't any this time.
No.
Okay.
So I guess those races and the city council races are not really, those are all so local. They're just to those places. I think that What I find more interesting are the propositions that we had to vote on here.
I agree. Let's finish
A,
up.
B, C, I, D.
I agree. I do want to talk about those. Let's finish up city council races almost as quickly as we finished up the supervisor races. Ross typically has elections. 2 out of the 3 incumbents ran and won re-election, Elizabeth Breckus and Beach Huell. And one of the new candidates, Bill Kircher, won. And Ross, most people don't know or care about Ross because it's so tiny and they don't contribute as much politically to the county as council members from other cities do. Tiburon just had a special 2-year seat. 3 people ran. Jack Ryan, who'd won before, narrowly won, I think, against one candidate who was endorsed by the Marin Democratic Party and one endorsed by the Marin IJ, and neither one won. Jack Ryan won. Mill Valley had 3 incumbents, but 1 stepped down, 1 resigned, 1 ran for re-election, Sashi
McAtee.
I don't know why I'm in trouble with that. And she won, not surprisingly. Another one ran for a special 2-year seat caused by a resignation of a colleague, and that's Jim Wickham. And that left 2 vacant seats for the regular 3-4-year terms, and they were won by new candidates Urban Carmel and Tricia Osa.
Goodness.
And finally, Cordovadeer didn't have a race at all because they only had 2 new candidates, Fred Casisa and Charles Lee. Both filed for the 2 available seats, but since there were only 2, they weren't on the ballot. So that's pretty simple. Nothing really contested there.
That's the easy way to get elected.
And a couple of sanitary districts, even easier. There were 2 districts, 5 incumbents, all 5 ran, no challengers. Boom, automatically reelected, nothing on the ballot. But the tax measures, as you said, Jack, are the big ones. I've never seen so many big tax measures on one ballot in Marin, and this maybe creates, there's probably a term for this, tax fatigue.
Well, I think tax fatigue was created some years ago. I just think it's now catching up.
You might be right. I've been suggesting.
It's a matter of how long can this go on.
I agree. And California's always been pretty generous about taxes, especially for education. Marin even more so. But this time they said no to a bunch of taxes, including education taxes. So I think tax fatigue is indeed setting in Marin.
Well, I think one of the things, we look at tax fatigue, I think more and more people are becoming aware of the unfunded liabilities that the education system, but the public employees system, were $333.7 billion of unfunded liabilities
Statewide?
for the state.
All school districts, all everything?
All public employees, all the public employees unions, for the all their health plans and retirement. Now, who's going to pay that?
Yeah. I agree with you that they have let that unfunded liability get too high. Now, you ask any elected official from any body, any local elected body in Marin or elsewhere, oh no, we're taking care of that, we're paying it down, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. But every time I see figures every year, it keeps getting higher, and it's just way too high, and it's starting to affect their ability to deliver the basic services which people have depended on for decades.
Well, that's why they're asking for this money.
And then they have special
the
taxes.
taxpayers are saying, wait a minute,
Don't we pay for that with our regular
we're
taxes?
already paying for this. You want more money to make up for the mistakes you've been making for the past 25 years?
I agree. And that's why COST, C-O-S-T, a relatively new taxpayer organization in Marin, is refreshing. They don't just automatically knee-jerk oppose all taxes. They supported Measure C, for example, but they oppose Measure I, and they oppose most taxes because, exactly as we've been saying, they think taxes are too high. And this is what, I mean, I've seen other tax measures lose, but that's the rarity, the exception rather than the rule. Now, most of them are losing, or they're much closer than expected. And I think people are going to have to go back and say, well, what are reasonable limits here? There's a phrase I like, although it doesn't speak too highly of elected officials, called a la carte taxes. Well, let's take something sexy and popular that people need and want and like fire service, and we'll impose a special tax for that because everybody will vote for that.
And they put a rider on
it. But you were exactly right that they say, wait a minute. At some point, people are going to say, isn't that what our regular tax is paid for? Why does there have to be a special tax for fire protection?
Well, I look at Measure A, Tamalpais School District. 2 years ago, they had another ballot measure. They voted for it. Now you come back 2 years later asking for more money? You didn't plan far enough ahead. 2 years is not it was not a long-term planning. I would expect, if you're thinking you're going to plan a little more than 2 years ahead.
I agree. That's a very serious criticism. Most school districts, I would say, in Marin have a partial tax and a bond measure every 5 or 10 years. That's okay, maybe, or 15 or 20, but not 2 years apart, the same kind of tax. That's wrong.
What happens if the tax doesn't pass for a school district?
They tend to put it back on the ballot, or they say, now we're going to make massive cuts. and class sizes will be higher, and we're going to lose a lot of the special classes like
It's always
arts.
the same fear, selling fear.
Selling fear.
Well, that's exactly what Measure C was, selling fear.
I couldn't disagree. However, let's talk about Measure C. That's an exception to this growing trend we were just describing as people having tax fatigue. This was a new tax, never been done before. You'd think that it would lose. But I don't think there's ever been a wildfire prevention tax, and Marin is doing one. Why? Because of fear, I agree. But apparently it was a really well-done campaign. They got a lot of input, a lot of buy-in, a lot of endorsements from a lot of people, including cost. And it's only 10 years. That's a reasonable number, not like SMART going for 30 years, and it doesn't even start for 9 years. That's tying us up for the next 39 years. That's too many. People understandably don't like that, and for a lot of other reasons too. They don't like the SMART tax. But the wildfire prevention tax seemed to be much more popular and well done. I've heard various presentations on it, probably all of us have, and read a bunch of things, and people are just impressed that this is what we need to reduce the chances of
Well,
wildfire.
how do you prevent a wildfire? I mean,
Well,
Good question.
part of the wildfire issue goes back to mistakes made by PG&E. I hate to say it, but it was
I agree.
they stopped funding their maintenance of chopping back trees. I want to go all the way back to San Bruno and that explosion down there.
yeah.
Do you know why that happened?
They didn't check them enough.
No, it's even deeper than that. There used to be huge gas tanks around, and we produce gas, not liquid gas, but gas.
Natural gas.
And as the gas production went up, the tank would expand to take it. Well, they started removing those tanks. A, because they were unsightly, people wanted them gone, and B, because they thought it was costing them money. So now when they produce the gas, they put the pressure in the gas lines. The gas line, they're welded, and when you increase pressure, it expands, decrease, it contracts. They've been doing that for 20 years down in San Bruno, and at one point it just cracked and the gas leaked out and exploded. Well, when the gas on top exploded, the flame went down in the pipe, blew up the whole thing,
The whole neighborhood.
the whole neighborhood. But that was lack of paying attention. They used to have a contract with various tree services throughout the state to make sure and go around and trim all the branches that got anywhere near connectors on the power lines. They
Yeah.
stopped doing it a few years ago to
Oh.
enhance the bottom line for the money they were paying the upper management. Outrageous salaries. So, hey, we got to cut someplace. Can't raise the bills. The PUC was saying you can't raise the bills. Well, now they're bankrupt. Now they're going to need money, and we are going to bear the brunt of it.
I share your low opinion of PG&E, and they've done this before. They've gone through bankruptcy several times, and they make promises that they will trim the trees better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they don't. Now, here's the basic philosophical governance issue, which I suspect you and I are going to disagree on. When a private corporation who is motivated primarily by profits, not just by choice, but by they're forced to, otherwise they can get a derivative suit from their shareholders for not maximizing their profits. So they have to maximize their profits. And by the way, they pay their CEO tens of millions of dollars, like most big corporations, and that the shareholders always want their quarterly dividends. That's a lot of pressure. Now, there are some utilities that are not privately owned, profit-seeking corporations. SMUD, for example, LA County and Water, they're government operations. And it's very tempting to say, like some legislators were doing, well, maybe we should just eliminate PG&E or buy them out and have it become a government-operated corporate. You probably disagree with that because Republicans tend to think that government is bad.
No. Let's
There are
stop here.
exceptions.
What I disagree with is the fact that we know there are people at fault for making these decisions. There are no consequences for bad behavior.
I agree with that.
Our government is full of people that are malfeasant. Pops up all over the place. Does anything ever happen? No.
Should the state attorney general's office be charging PG&E executives for breaking the law? It sounds like good to me.
Somebody should be charged.
I agree.
We know who did it. Why don't they go to jail? Why don't they suffer a consequence? Look, you know as well as I do, if there are no consequences for bad behavior, you're going to get more bad behavior.
I agree. This sounds a lot like, and tell me if you agree, 12 years ago, the last huge stock market crash, the Great Recession, was caused, in most of what I've read, by banksters, if you will, who crashed the system because they were negligent and greedy. Did any of them ever go to jail or even get charged? No. Should they have been? I think they should have. Same is true of PG&E?
Well, I'm not disputing that, but the problem with that started with telling banks, and this was the Community Reinvestment Act under Carter, you've got to stop redlining. Okay, I can agree with that, but you've got to make loans to people. and you had to lower the qualifications. Well, they kept getting lower and lower and lower. Now, the secret of the banking system is you go out and borrow a loan, you're going to pay them interest. The money they make is not from the interest you pay, but from the fees that are charged up front to get that loan. So is that not a field of ripe? All of a sudden, we have what are called no-doc loans or liar loans. You walk in the bank, oh, I want to borrow $300,000. Can you pay it back? Oh, yeah. Can you prove it? Well, you don't have to. That's not. How much did you want to sign here? Well, this is going to collapse. And now we have 3 types of paper: A paper, B paper, C paper. And the problem, if you watch the movie The Big Short, read the book.
I did.
Okay, well, the character that was played by Christian Bale, was the only guy that said, hey, wait a minute, we've got A, B, and C paper all in this one note. Now, all of that came about because of the failed savings and loan.
What about the collateralized debt obligations?
Well, that's where CDMs came in. Collateralized debt
obligations
came in. Well, that's our CDOs came in because there was, after the collapse of the savings and loans, which were built for the sole purpose of making real estate loans, they didn't have the money. The banks didn't have the money. Where are we going to get the money to make this thing go away? So we had the Resolution Trust Corporation, which took over all these failed properties because nobody could sell them. That was a government entity, was trying to sell the properties. Where's the money going to come from? Well, there isn't the money in the society. Hey, I got an idea. Let's turn them into securities and sell the securities on Wall Street. Good idea. I think it's a great idea. A paper, B paper, C paper. The person buying the security knows they're buying which level of risk, A, B, or C. C's a high risk. But then these people started mixing A, B, and C paper together and saying, oh, this is A and B paper. The guy buys it. He gets it. He thinks he's getting A and B paper. But when C fails, that ruins the rest of the bond. And all of a sudden, you, who invested this money in buying this debt obligation, are screwed. And you can't pay her, and she can't pay me, and I can't pay him, and that's what caused the whole system to fail.
I don't disagree with you. I didn't realize so much of it maybe was about some of the things you mentioned, but regardless, we agree. I think we digressed a little bit from PG&E, but the same principle applies.
Well, no, the fact is there are people that were liable for making those decisions,
right, and
who got away with it.
They shouldn't have.
That was the point.
I agree. And I think wildfire is one of them, and that's why Measure C. It makes you sound a little bit like a liberal Democrat, no offense. But those are the people that I think are fueling Bernie Sanders' race. They're mad as hell at government differently than Republicans are. And they're mad as hell that corporations are getting away with murder, as in San Bruno, if you will. And they're not being charged, they're not being held accountable. And I think that's a liberal left position and fueling Bernie Sanders, as I said.
Well, holding people accountable? A liberal left position?
Well, you're right. Republicans have some claim to saying that's but it doesn't happen under either administration. You're right.
It hasn't happened. And why not? Because politics, Greg, once you start getting into politics, you start getting money, and it's kind of a sinecure. As long as you keep your nose clean, don't get caught in bed with a dead woman or a live boy, you're okay.
I have heard that.
And so you get elected, you're making money, and how tough is the job? Some people work hard, some people don't. And
the only way I can think that happens is, an administration makes a mess of it, Democrat or Republican, and that maybe happens more often than not. And the new party comes in and says, okay, we're going to change all that now. And they promise all sorts of ethical reforms, and they say, we're not going to go back and drag the country through a divisive period of finger pointing. We're just going to ignore all that.
That's an ideal way to say it.
That's the way they say it.
The truth of the matter is, and I said this to you after our last debate, and you said you disagree with it, the deep state. And what is the deep state? These are all the civil service employees. You got elected to a new office. When you went in, the city councilman, you knew a lot because it was local, you were there. But who did you ask questions of? The staff.
You're right.
And how long has the staff been there?
You're right.
20 years. What are they going to do? They're going to have you go in the direction they think you should. They want you to go.
There's too much.
So what happens when you get to the state legislature? What happens when you get to the national legislature?
You're in that habit.
You're in the habit, and those people want to keep their jobs, and they want to keep things going the way it's going.
The logical thing to do would be consult with your colleagues, your more senior and experienced colleagues, but the Brown Act prevents that. You can talk to one member at a time of your 5-member body, that's it. If you talk to 2 members, you violate the Brown Act, so you can't do that.
Well, you can't do that in a closed session, but you could do it in an open session.
At a meeting. But how many people want to say, I'd like to have a ranging, open discussion on this topic, which we properly
Well, Greg,
agendized.
maybe if enough people made enough noise like you and I are making on opposite sides of this coin, because the issue isn't our political philosophy.
You're right.
The issue is right and wrong.
You're right, and bring it on the agendas regularly, whether or not it's called for by the people, but it should be called for by the people, and then let them have that free-ranging discussion the only time they can have it. I thought I turned that off, sorry about that. So
I'm not here, Greg.
Yeah. Why is that? I thought I turned. Anyway, so you're right. We should have more discussions of that in public. The only time when elected officials can do that, because they can't have private discussions even amongst themselves, especially amongst themselves. Without
They're not
violating the
supposed
Brown
to,
Act.
but
They're not supposed to. I don't think they do. Although there are occasions when they'll all go to a meeting together, and 3 of them out of 5 happen to be sitting together, and they happen to be chatting. One's like, shouldn't do that, but they do.
Well,
MCCMC meetings, Marin County Council mayors and council members.
Yeah, the issue is not the Brown Act so much, which was to prevent things, but it gets in the way. There's a lot of things like that. But the fact of the matter is, we are dealing with that fact. So
Yeah.
we got to make people aware of it.
I've always felt that you can raise taxes to the extent the voters will allow it in elections, and most of the time, until maybe this month, they have been. And you do that by demonstrating trust with the public by saying, look, the last few times we've put a special tax on the ballot and it passed, we've done good things with it. Here's why. Now, you don't always have to believe that, but they're going to say that. And therefore, we're justified in seeking another one because we're doing good work and we're putting it to good use, and this is the only way we're going to fund these needs which you want. That's what they say. Now, I agree with your criticism about staff. So, yes, all elected officials rely heavily on staff. If not, they're seen as a loner and an isolationist and arrogant. So you ask staff a lot of questions because you can't ask your colleagues. And the staff, it's true, are too quick to say, this is the way we've always done it, this is the way we're going to continue to do it, don't worry about the unfunded liability, we're taking care of that. And you go, okay. And you take their word for it, and that may be a mistake sometimes.
Well, the unfunded liability happens to be a different problem, and that's caused by the fact that the state unions are negotiating with the people that give them their jobs.
I agree. That is a
I go to
problem.
work for you, and I say, look, we're going to support you, but you got to give me money. And that's essentially what it is.
That would violate the law, but it's almost that blunt.
Come on, it isn't.
Once in a while, I've heard extremely ethical politicians say, or a story where they'll say they had a nice substantive topic with them, a discussion with them on some substantive topic, and then the politician will too often say, "While I got you on the phone, how about a contribution?" Or the constituent will say, "Oh, well, I got you on the phone. I want to contribute to your." And he says, "I wish you hadn't said that. Now I can't do what it is you wanted me to do because I can't mix those conversations with the same conversation. Let's do it a different time."
I don't think it's quite that overt, Greg. It's not quite that
Sometimes,
overt.
but-
We know that.
Yes, no,
But that's what goes
Would they
on.
really say that?
They're usually a little more subtle, but once in a while, there's that kind of a story which proves the rule that there is too much mixing.
Would
There
they
shouldn't be.
would they really say that though? I mean, it sounds like the politician is very very honest if he's saying, "Oh, I couldn't discuss that with you."
That is very honest for him to say that. And the constituent should realize that. But too often they say, well, what does a politician want from me? They want me to, to give them money, and they want to be able to talk policies with me. Why don't I put them both in the same conversation? No, don't do that. Anyway,
The issue becomes one of, we were talking about Measure C. And what was the thing on Measure C? It was fear. And what the fear of what? Wildfires breaking out. Now, I was in another meeting representing another group and listening, and it wasn't the men Republicans, listening to the fire chiefs come together and make this plea. And I sat there thinking about this. Now, having been in real estate, I've been on just about every road in this county. And there are certain places, namely Mill Valley and Fairfax, that are in a bit of danger because they're very narrow streets and a whole lot of growth. And these are places that could possibly suffer from wildfires. We haven't so far. That's kind of a,
at least in
Blessing.
recent decades, but we used
Yeah.
to. And you think that only Fairfax and Mill Valley are the big risks?
no, I
hadn't
didn't
thought
say
about it.
only. I said those, the biggest places. Because in parts of San Anselmo, when you get up in those hills, when San Anselmo and Fairfax, those were built as summer cottages back in the 20s and 30s. And now they've turned into homes and high density and lots of growth.
Lovely.
Fortunately, a lot of it's trimmed back, but it could happen.
Like Oakland and like Sonoma County and like Paradise.
Exactly. And Paradise was a paradise, beautiful place.
Yeah.
But you can't have something that's going to cause a fire. Now,
That's the town that burned down completely?
Yes,
Yeah.
in
Yes.
Butte County.
Just
yeah.
Up
above
northern
Chico.
California.
So you need a better utility company, keeping the trees better trimmed, and as our president would say, rake the forests better.
You wouldn't think that the duty of the utility company is to go out and cut trees or something,
no,
but
to keep the trees away from the power.
Yeah.
The power pole goes up and you got connectors. It's not the wire, it's where the connections
Yeah.
are that a spark will happen between two pieces connecting together. That's where the fire.
not the wires.
Not the wires, no, the wires they're insulated.
And I don't mean to say that this is all PG&E. Local jurisdictions have an important role to play on the ordinances they pass, which require their homeowners to keep their homes relatively fire safe. Sometimes they can go too far. I think that happened in Mill Valley last year when they say, okay, we're going to have a brand new, never before seen hardscape provision, nothing growing within 3 feet of your home.
Oh, yes.
And all these people said, what? I got all these beautiful landscape plants, decades old, that are gorgeous right up against the house. You tell me I have to remove all those?
Oh,
Yes.
I compare that.
People were very unhappy because that wouldn't necessarily solve the problem. I mean, let's say you have your things 3 feet away. Of course, it makes sense to have zones, 20, 30 feet or whatever, very minimal landscaping, and another 30 feet beyond that, a little more, but still sparse, so that you don't have giant clusters right up against the house. A lot of us are looking at our homes a lot different and say, oh, I guess that tree's got to go, and that tree's got to go, and that tree's got to go. We shouldn't grow all these things. Because what's happening is the burning embers, the leaves blowing a mile or two in advance, they land in a pile of leaves at the edge of your house, and boom, there goes your house. So don't let piles of leaves and other things exist against your house.
Well, San Rafael got very big on bamboo removal. There's a lot of bamboo, which apparently is very, very flammable very quickly. And so they went around forcing people to cut it away from wooden fences. You know, you got a 5-year-old fence isn't going to burn. A 25-year-old fence, boom.
That's a good point. Also cedar and acacia and mostly juniper. They're called gasoline trees because they go really quick. So anything you have even within 5 or 10 feet of your house, get rid of that tree. Then there's lots of others. Trees grow like weeds over the course of 5 or 10 years. Hey, I just remember when that sprouted. It was a volunteer. Now it's a 10-foot tree, very full, right up against the house. Whoosh, gone.
It's called maintenance and called awareness. And that's one of the things that came out with this meeting we've had with the three fire chiefs that were promoting Yes on Sea was that, pay attention. And we don't. I don't think that we as a culture are paying much attention to anything. We're not paying attention to our finances. Half the people that are 65 or older have only about less than $300,000 net worth. And they're going to retire? That's going to be a real problem. You know, I mean, that's a problem coming to us. I don't know how it's ever going to get solved. We've got a lot of people with negative net worth.
And relying on Social Security isn't going to do it. Not everybody has a private pension, although in a perfect world they would. Or they would have saved, but too many people
But
don't.
you see, they don't. People, I remember in the 60s, getting a gasoline credit card was a big deal. Well, you know, getting a credit card was a big deal. Now they mail them to you when you get to be a sophomore in high school. And everybody goes, oh, I got a credit card. I can spend whatever I want. And, you know, it's like, I just got to have money. I still have checks in my checkbook.
Right.
Well,
Worry
it's the
about
same
paying
thing.
later. I can charge now.
Right. And so they do. And as a culture, and you can blame all kinds of things. The facts are that each one of us should be held responsible, but we've also turned ourselves into a victim. It's not my fault, it's your fault. You did that to me.
I love these little, sometimes they seem like digressions, but they're philosophical issues of great importance, which we take off
but
on
they
from these
have
measures.
to do with these measures.
I agree. And
Now we're going to be taxing people. Look at what happened with B. What happened with B?
A and B, Novato.
B was Novato.
Yeah, B was Novato. Both of them lost with 50 and 60% of the vote. They both needed 67. They weren't even close.
Yeah.
Usually these things pass really overwhelming, but they too have had controversy. Some people don't like the school board members. They don't like the policies. They don't like they're spending money on this.
Well,
they don't like whatever.
The head of the school board that wanted this passed was making $237,000 a year.
Superintendent, not school board.
Superintendent, thank you. $237,000 a year, but the teachers were making just a little over 50 and were working for the past 18 months without a contract. And he's standing there saying, well, they have to meet these things. I'm sorry, you're getting $237,000 a year for a small number of schools? I think you're way, way overpaid. And therein lies another problem. A whole lot of people are making a whole lot of money, and the people doing the work, the people that provide the value to the system, aren't getting paid for the value they create.
There you go, sounding like a Democrat again. I agree with you.
No, I'm sounding like a Republican because we don't pay for things we don't get.
I couldn't agree more.
Then you're sounding like a Republican.
Well, I don't necessarily agree that the superintendent is being overpaid. Yes, I remember when they were all making 100-something thousand. Now they're all making 200-something thousand. We're going to lower that? No, but maybe we could slow down the rate of increase, because it is becoming increasingly unfair when a superintendent makes $250,000 and their teachers are making $50,000. That's a pretty big difference. Teachers should be paid more, and maybe superintendents should be paid less. So at least slow down the rate of their increase over the next decade or so.
25 years ago, the supervisors decided to let employees retire at 55 because it was cheaper to hire new people. I mean, that's a nuts thing. Now you got to pay them their employment pension for the next
retirement
40
pension,
years or
yeah.
30 years.
I agree. It seemed always counterintuitive. Actually, there was a movement briefly about 10 years ago to move the retirement age, at least for cops, down to 50 instead of 55. Well, there is some logic to the idea that you don't want an overweight, out-of-shape guy chasing a crook down the street because he's 53. And if you had somebody younger, he might be able to run a little faster. But that doesn't mean you let people retire at 50 and compound this problem of
But see, there's the problem there is,
funded liabilities.
well, not only that, but if you are in that kind of a position, you must be required to maintain a certain level of physical readiness. That's a requirement of the job. You're a lawyer, I understand. And you're required to take a number of continuing education courses to keep your license current, aren't you?
Yes.
Oh,
I'm a real estate broker.
Same thing.
And up until I achieved my recent status,
Congratulations on
I had to
retiring.
get 45 hours of continuing education, meeting certain specific courses.
Every year or every 3 years?
Every 4 years.
4 years.
You had to have these courses, so many in certain areas you had to take. We had to take an ethics course. If you didn't take it and didn't pass it, you didn't get a renewal of your license.
oh,
Makes sense to me.
Yep,
Well, if
doctors
you're going to
too.
be a fireman or policeman, you must perform, it's a physical job.
I agree.
A highly physical job.
I
If you can't perform these certain exercises, you cannot be in the front line. Maybe you have to move to some other position. But the fact is, we've lost sight of qualifications and meeting those qualifications in order to maintain the job.
Let's finish these last couple measures and then go on to national and political stuff. I think we've talked about Measure C, the wildfire prevention tax, which as we speak is balancing right around 67. I saw in the IJ this morning it's at 69% now, so it's a couple points over the 2/3 required.
Oh,
and
so
the
it's
trend is
passing.
going, it's likely going to pass. It was right on the bubble, but now it looks like it's going to pass. Measure D, I think we talked about briefly, the San Geronimo golf course. The way I heard it was that a small group of people, golfers, were unhappy about the golf course being closed, and they wanted to mandate it being put back into business as a golf course. You corrected me and said it really only required recreational uses, and anything other than that would require a vote of the people. But the opponents to that thought that that would set a precedent, which is bad. Every time any local plan wants to get changed, it has to be a vote of the people. That means all of Marin would be voting on a local Sausalito issue or a Novato issue or a West Marin issue. So I think that's why you said it made you uncomfortable.
Well, the issue became one of, apparently the supervisor didn't want a golf course out there. Spawn wanted to close off part of the golf course for rerouting the creek and getting advantage of the runoff. And the county wanted to buy the property. The owner didn't want to sell it for what the county wanted to pay. Then the county couldn't get the money, so they went to Trust for Public Lands. Trust for Public Lands overpaid for the golf course to get the deal done, based on the fact the county said, we'll get you the money, don't worry, you buy it, and we'll be able to fund it next year. Well, next year came, and the county couldn't get the money to fund it, and now Trust for Public Land wants to sell this property. Nobody's going to pay what they want for it, and nobody's going to pay it for a golf course. Now, golf over the past 10 years has been declining in recreational value. But people still want to play golf, and golf course was making money at the time that it closed.
I've heard stories that it would have failed like so many others, and so it wasn't long for this world. But I agree with you that Trust for Public Land got lured into a deal which was not a good deal for them. And
That's right.
The county didn't come through, and they kind of got screwed, and now they're stuck with this thing, and they're not getting paid, but
And
the county was supposed to buy it.
the yes vote would have brought this further into the public eye, and therein lies the issue. Not enough of the public really understood what it was all about, because it was kind of a backroom deal.
But it lost, perhaps largely because of this sense that it was only the golfers that wanted golf, and they're in a tiny minority. Or the other issue, which is that this would require countywide votes every time a local community plan needed to be changed.
It lost because nobody really knew what it was all about.
Yeah.
And it's easier to vote no on something than it is to vote yes.
If you don't
So it
understand
lost
it, yeah.
60-40. It needed a majority.
Yeah, and therein lies the issue with that.
You know, we haven't talked about the SMART measure enough. SMART was a big deal for Marin, still is. I knew at the time it passed, and I was a strong proponent when it passed, that the ridership projections were dismal, that the financial projections were dismal, but I thought, let's get it in place. We'll need it eventually. We probably won't be able to afford it in 20, 30 years, so let's build it now, and eventually we'll grow into it. And maybe that's still true. They say it's growing 4% a year. Well, that means in 10 years it'll be 40% bigger. Is that enough? Some people say that the public subsidy, which all public transit has, is too high. Others, SMART says, no, it's not too high, it's fairly low. I don't know which is true, but I thought that the people that liked SMART 12 years ago when they first passed it still like it, and they'd vote to renew it. The people that didn't like SMART still don't like it, and they're going to vote against that measure. But there's some new opponents. I think people didn't like the train horn, because that was blowing not just every day for weeks and months while they tested it, but also at night. All night. There's what possible excuse could there be for that? Now, that was not a SMART decision. That was a regulation of the Federal Railroad Administration. But SMART got blamed, so a lot of people turned against SMART because of that. And a lot of people just think that we have no business running a commuter rail between two suburban counties. And I'm sympathetic to that argument. I still think, I don't know if it's a Marin, I'm an exceptionalist view that, but we're Marin, we're so special, we ought to be able to have a train in Marin and Sonoma, even if other two communities can't, because we're Marin, we're special, we're rich. I don't know, people might not go for that.
I don't think it was, I think it was far more than that. The fact is, you don't come in after 4 times it took them to get this passed. It gets passed, they build the thing, and don't worry about the grade level crossings, it'll all work out. Well, you go downtown at 3rd and Heatherton and try and get through that intersection, and it can take you 3 or 4 stoplights to ever get through it.
I do it every morning, it's rush hour.
Well, then you know what it's
I
like.
do.
And it backs it up to 4th and to 5th, and sometimes even as far back as Mission.
And I look at the freeway, and I look at all these backups, and I remember what we said during the campaign 12 years ago. Oh, no, it'll be just like a stoplight. Stoplight's about 30 seconds. These are at least 60 seconds, sometimes longer, and I've seen it go up and down twice while I'm still waiting at the same stoplight. It really is infuriating, and wasn't very accurate projections of that.
The train going through Centerville,
Yes,
downtown,
yes, going
yeah.
through downtown Centerville.
Well, it's right there at the transit center, and all the bus has to do is pull out, or, and here's the real killer, pedestrians walking across when you get a green light to turn right. The pedestrians are walking across, you can't turn right, you can't move. And then sometimes Tamalpais and Lincoln are red. They turn green, now they're all stacked up for 2 blocks full of cars.
You ask what happens if these fail. They put them back on the ballot. I don't know if they'll put it back on in 2 years or 4 years or 6 years. They've got 9 years before the current one runs out.
And therein lies, why am I voting now for something that you have 9 years left to work on?
And it doesn't start
I mean,
for
that
9
doesn't
years.
make any kind of sense at all.
And then 30 years beyond that is what it runs for. It's a long time, from 39 years from now before it expires. I agree. But as we get closer, it'll get more urgent. People will say, are we really going to close down SMART? We have a lot of stranded assets, a nice economic term for, geez, we spent $10 billion or whatever building this thing, and now
Well,
it's worth
sometimes
nothing.
it's easier to shut it down than, you've got to
Keep it
stop
going.
feeding a beast that's eating you
I
alive.
can understand that argument for sure.
So let's wait and see what happens.
Yeah, we need a few more years, I agree. And maybe things will improve more than 4% a year. Maybe studies will conclusively prove that we're not getting an inappropriately high subsidy, and it's more than people can afford. And maybe people will be educated enough to support it next time, maybe not.
Well, maybe there are some other issues. Some years ago, I was on remember Stuart Strong?
Yes.
I was on his TV show with a supervisor from Sonoma talking about
Marin Put was his newsletter for 30 years ago.
putting traffic. We had traffic problems and building new offices. Where are we going to get the people? How are we going to get them there? What are we going to do with them? How do we do it? So I went to the Golden Gate Bridge, which has a fabulous library downstairs, and studied some things about it. I learned something that I thought very interesting. People that take public transportation, I get on the bus here, I get off there, and I walk a block to my office or my destination as 100%. And then every block you walk, you lose some. But what's significant is if I have to transfer, I get to this point, and then I have to transfer to another mode of transportation, it's a significant loss. I think it's somewhere in 30 or 35%. Well, that's a big number. So I'm now looking at getting on this train. When you get off the train, if you're going to take the ferry, you've got almost a mile to walk Well, who's going to do that? Well, now today would be beautiful. I'd love to do it today. And for probably the next 7 or 8 months until November.
When it's cold and rainy again.
But what happens in December? Am I going to walk in the rain and the cold and the wind?
I think it's only got a third of a mile or something, but that's too long.
Well, what? It doesn't make any difference. We're not walking people anymore.
Right, I agree.
Well, now, gentlemen, is there anything about the national
Yeah, let's talk
election
about
that you want
national.
to
I
talk
was just
about?
going to say, much as I love talking about local stuff, I also love talking about national stuff. And nothing too much happened at the state level, and no surprise here that our congressmen and our assemblymen, Jared Huffman and Mark Levine, respectively, won huge victories in the primary, and will win huge victories against their opponents, their second place finishers in November, because they're unknown and unfunded, and sometimes it's the same opponent over and over again. And so we're going to get Mark Levine and Jared Huffman again. Which, anyway. At the national level, I just have to say what a surprise it was. I often look back at the Republican primary for president. Was it 4 years ago or 8 years ago?
Before we go past Assembly District 10 and Mark Levin.
Ah, yes. Compulsory voting bill.
This is the most asinine thing to ever come about. And for him to say, well, they have it in other countries. I'm sorry, this is the United States of America. Voting is a privilege, and it's a right. And I think it's an obligation. But it's not the government's place to say it's an obligation. Now,
I agree.
when I was first thought about this, that just really, my ire rose, as I'm sure you can imagine. But as I thought about it, I thought, this is sinister as hell. Yes, you're looking at me. How do you come to that conclusion, Jack? You're familiar with ballot harvesting, aren't you?
Yes.
Who got that passed, by the way?
Was that the Republicans?
No,
The Democrats.
The Democrats that passed.
Wait a minute. They've been fighting it.
Who's been fighting it?
Well, there was a Republican in a special district 2 years ago in South Carolina that was arrested and convicted and jailed for ballot harvesting. It's
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about California, what's happening in California.
What's
The
ballot?
Democrats passed ballot harvesting.
What is that?
Well, I didn't know what it was for a while, but what it is you get a ballot. I call you up and say, have you voted yet? Oh, I haven't. Don't worry, I'll come over and pick up your ballot and I'll take care of it for you. All of a sudden, who's voting for you? I am.
Because you don't know if he's going to change your ballot or throw it away if he thinks he doesn't like the way
I
you
was
vote.
just going to say, if he doesn't like the looks of it, he can throw it away. Yeah.
There's a philosophy in government that it's illegal, long been illegal. Laws have been passed that you cannot receive anything of value for voting. Every few years, some restaurant, ignorant of this law, says, come on in and show us your ballot stub and get a free bowl of soup.
Yeah.
Illegal. You cannot receive anything of value for voting.
Well, that of course means nobody's going to break the law. We know nobody ever breaks a law.
But it's the same philosophy as we're going to make it illegal for you not to vote. Wait a minute, that's a little heavy-handed. I'm embarrassed by our relatively low turnout. We're supposed to be the greatest democracy.
Let's stop right there. The issue is the government interfering with this. And what I see is all of a sudden, if you don't vote, if this law passes, you don't vote. Only if you register to vote. You don't have to register yet. That's next. But if you don't register to vote, nobody knows whether you did or did not. But if you do register to vote and you don't vote, you're subject to some kind of punishment. So now it opens the door, Greg, and this is the sinister part. You can't pay people to vote. But Greg, don't worry about it. You know, register here as a Democrat and everything will be taken care of. We'll show up and we'll take care of the ballot for you. Somewhere along the line now, at the turn of the last century, come on into our bar and we'll feed you lunch and then go vote. That's the next thing. Yes, it's illegal.
I don't disagree with you. I never thought about ballot harvesting being an ultimate result of a law against a compulsory voting law. But you're right, it could well lead to that. And that's the kind of thing that Democrats squawk a lot about and want to make changes
Except
to.
that it's Democrats that are proposing. Democrats got the ballot harvesting passed in California, and it's a Democrat that is proposing this ballot. Your governor just signed into law the 270, that you can change your registration.
You could
right away.
re-register on election day.
Yeah.
It's a provisional ballot, so they want to check to make sure you didn't vote more than once.
But first off, I disagree with mail-in ballots unless you've got a real strong reason that you can't be there and go to the poll on election day. It shouldn't be there.
I've always liked to vote in the polls, and friends shamed me into saying, no, you got to vote by mail like everybody else. So I signed up to do that. But I get my ballot, I hang on to it, and I don't want it to be a provisional ballot, and I don't do it early enough because I want to wait till election day. I usually do it at the Civic Center. But the last 2 times, I've gone back to the polling place. And as long as you submit your entire envelope, and they'll give you a new ballot, you vote on it, it's counted that night like everything else, and then you're not a provisional ballot.
Yeah.
So I have the best of all possible worlds. I get one by mail if I want to vote early, but I take it into the polling place on election day if I want to wait till election day.
And you don't vote twice.
But Greg, you've always been the exception.
Well, I just think giving people options
I
is good.
agree with you, but
Some people say we shouldn't have 2 parallel systems because it's so expensive to have. By the way, we're moving from polling places. The last year we'll have polling places. Starting 2 years, next election cycle, we'll have vote centers. Instead of 1,000, I can't remember how many, 100 voting polling places, we'll have like 20 vote centers, which means instead of having to go a couple blocks to your polling place, you might have to go a couple miles to the nearest voting center if you want to vote on election day. But they'll be open for 10 or 20 days before the election. You can go any day up before election day. And it's as fully staffed and equipped and capable electronically as the registrar of voters office. So you get better service. Just, you have to go a couple miles further maybe if you really want to go there. You can still mail it by mail as always. You can take your ballot into any vote center, like a polling place. And so it's not that different. It's just there's fewer of them.
That makes sense, though.
Yeah. We got 15 minutes left. Let's talk about the presidential race. I have to say I was shocked at the recent change in momentum, and I really want to hear your opinion on both the Democrats and about Trump. I'd been describing Joe Biden all last year as a fragile frontrunner. He might make too many gaffes. He might fade out. He looks too old-fashioned. He looks too old, period. And he is not arousing the kind of enthusiasm which is needed to win. You got to be a rock star to win. And he wasn't raising the money. I thought, this guy is not going to last, even though he's been nominal front runner nearly all of last year. But pretty soon he's overtaken by Elizabeth Warren and then Bernie Sanders the last couple months. And after losing the first 3 primaries, I thought he's dead meat. He is out. He's gone. Yes, he was supposed to win in South Carolina because of the African American vote. And he did. But no one predicted how big he'd win by. Now, just a week before, Bernie had won Nevada as expected, more than expected. So suddenly Bernie's the overwhelming frontrunner. Looked like he's going to run away with it. And suddenly, South Carolina, Biden is the front runner more than ever. And then a few days later, we have Super Tuesday where he wins like 10 out of 14 states. And suddenly, Biden is the overwhelming front runner, almost. Now, Bernie has almost as many delegates, but if you look ahead to the remaining states and you compare them to what happened 4 years ago, let's say all the votes that went for Hillary are now going to go to Biden. Pretty much that's true. And the votes that Bernie had, he's going to have again. Pretty much true. I just don't. I think it's going to be another long, hard race, but I just don't see Bernie. He could expand his base, but it's unlikely. Some people have this fixed image of him as being too angry, even though I don't think he is. Bernie, and being too wild, radical, and leftist.
Well, he is. He's angry, wild, and leftist.
No, I don't think he's wild and angry. I think he's gentlemanly.
He's a communist.
No, he's not.
Yes, he is.
People keep mistaking the difference between a socialist and a democratic
And what
socialist.
is the difference?
Democratic socialist is a form of democracy. Socialism is not democracy.
Well,
democratic socialism uses some more socialist ideals to have some government
the
run
government
operations
pays for things
within the context of democracy
to support those that don't.
Well, let's see.
Work.
In this country, we have socialized first responders, public safety, schools,
wait,
and on and on and on and on.
Those are services provided to the public in general, not to Greg Brockbank individually.
Why would you say?
Well, because all of a sudden you go on to food stamps or all the things that you as an individual get. Why do we have fire departments? Because we used to have all volunteer fire departments. And it wasn't very efficient, and everybody got a benefit from it, and only a few people contributed to it. Well, let's get everybody to contribute to it. The same with schools that started in the late 1800s. And the same with police departments. Let's put those because they're protecting all the public. Now they've been bastardized to such an extent in the police department that you can't arrest somebody unless you see him shooting somebody and get it on film, because otherwise they're going to get let out of jail. So, but when it comes down to getting private services, Medicare for all, first off, I had some problems with the Medicare problem when it went in. My big problem with the whole healthcare system is that what it costs you to get things done is totally divorced from you. You have no idea what it is.
I agree. And we all have problems with the healthcare system, but Medicare's overhead rate is 3%. Private insurers are 30%.
Yeah, and they should. I think private insurance should be more. And one of the issues, one of the
more
things.
Than 30% overhead? 30%?
No. I thought you said 30% contributors.
No, overhead.
Overhead is an issue that can be taken care of where there to be competition.
Administrative.
Right now, in the state of California, only certain health insurance companies are allowed to practice. I think it should be open nationwide, and all of a sudden you begin to see economies of scale. I look at Kaiser. Kaiser seems to do, when that first came in, my father worked for the city of San Francisco, so I've been a member of Kaiser since, 1950 or something.
Me too.
It's a well-done system. It's extremely well-run, and it keeps its overhead down to a minimum to provide the services.
I agree
I
with
think
this,
a lot of healthcare companies and auto insurance companies do the same thing. They charge what the market will bear. And people will buy insurance, and the state law says you have to have a certain basic coverage.
But every other
The state also provides the fact that if you buy insurance from a company that goes broke, there's a fund out there to take care of that. So they're monitored closely.
We've only got a few minutes left, but every other civilized country in the world has some way of guaranteeing some kind of universal health care to all its citizens, except the United States. The United States is the only one that has a profit-seeking entity, the private health insurance companies, standing between consumers who want health care and providers who want to provide it. Now, contrary to popular belief, it won't mean government-run health care. It only means government financing. We'd still have the same privately delivering health care that we have now. I would continue with Kaiser. They're a great health care deliverer, but they wouldn't be in the
company.
But they wouldn't be a health insurance company anymore, nor would anybody else. And we get down to 3% like Medicare.
But I disagree with that.
Medicare is
the government
wildly
can't
popular.
run anything. Look, they took over the Mustang Ranch in Nevada, sold liquor and sex, and they went broke.
That's pretty hard.
I
to
mean,
do.
come on.
Republicans
Greg.
always say the IRS, the post office, the DMV. See, government is incompetent.
No, we
or
don't
evil or
say
both.
all those things. The IRS is necessary. I don't like the idea. I think there's a better way to tax people. But Lois Lerner is a perfect example of what can happen to the IRS. She just privately denied a whole bunch of people getting their tax exemption because they were conservatives. And then all of a sudden, all the records were lost. They disappeared. And now there's a person that should be going to jail, but she skated off with her money.
She should have gone to jail.
Yeah.
Those things happen.
But
I think they
they
happen.
consistently happen
Who is
in the
she?
government.
But they more often happen in private corporations
Who is
because they're
Lois
motivated
Lerner?
by greed.
Who is
now,
Lois
is our
Lerner?
government system perfect?
Greed
No.
or profit?
I'll take government who is at least
Who do you
supervised by
work
governments are at least supervised by elected officials who the people vote for. Is that perfect?
No.
No, but it's
No.
better than
Who do you
corporations.
work for?
Myself. So do you.
Yeah, I do, and I don't deny it. And I
Who's
look
Lois
for as
Lerner?
much money as I can make. She was head of the IRS.
Oh, okay.
Under Obama.
Anyway,
Wow.
I wonder what your thoughts are about the presidential candidates. Trump,
God.
I'm surprised. Some people are saying he could win again. I always thought that he won 3 states, well, 5, unexpectedly in the North Midwest by less than 1 point each. So
Who
all he
did?
has- Trump,
Trump,
last election. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. And all 3 he won by less than 1%. So I thought all he has to do is drop by 1% each of those 3, and he won't be reelected, all else being the same. And to some degree that's happening. The polls I saw the other day say he has dropped 2 points below winning those 3 states. But that's where he was 4 years ago. Just before the election 4 years ago, he was losing those points. But that's called, the polling is becoming less accurate. The margin of error is becoming greater, and polls are more often wrong. So even though he was down 2 points in each of those states, he won all 3 of them. So
Yeah.
being down 2 points is no guarantee that we're going to win this time.
Yeah, and he also won the Electoral College, which you guys want to get rid of, which is one of the best things that was ever created in the Declaration, in the Constitutional
I don't think that's a
Convention.
partisan issue. It's true that I don't like it, but I understand why it was passed, and I'm not spending much time fighting over it because I don't think it's going to happen. I think there are reasons for it.
Well, it's
like
not going to
protecting small
happen,
states.
but the fact of the matter is, that was the big issue. Oh, that's the only reason I won the popular vote. You know, I felt like you some years ago about the Electoral College. You won the popular vote, you should win. Then I looked at the fact that 47 states would have not be represented. California, New York, and Washington would have been the states controlling it. California concerns me. This state is failing. This state has failed. It's just taking time for people to catch on to it. And they shouldn't be in charge of running the nation. I mean, look at what's going on, the homeless in San Francisco, the debt that we have in this state, the things that are failing. I mean, it's terrible.
There are
Now,
many
we're
problems in
talking
California,
about-
but we're still a front-running
But-
state.
Yeah, we
Very
are. We're the
successful.
5th or 8th largest
Sixth.
economy in the world. 32 million people in this state. We're huge. We're bigger than a whole lot of nations. And we have a great economy. But that doesn't mean it can't be mismanaged.
I agree.
Or managed better.
I agree.
I'm a little concerned this the other day. Your buddy Scott Schumer stood up on the steps of the Supreme Court and threatened specifically two Supreme Court justices.
Chuck Schumer.
That's outrageous. That should be, something should happen there. but nothing will.
I missed that, but didn't just Trump a week or two ago say that 2 Supreme Court justices should recuse themselves on all matters regarding the presidency?
Wait. He said they should recuse themselves because they had a specific interest. Your buddy Schumer stood on the steps of the Supreme Court in front of a wild crowd, whipping up that crowd because they were going to vote on a Louisiana law that stated a doctor had to have practicing privileges in order to participate in abortions in the hospital. That was it. But your buddy Schumer stood up there and said, they will reap the vengeance of the crowd, or something like that. But it was a direct threat to 2 sitting Supreme Court justices. That is wrong.
I agree. Occasionally, Supreme Court is lobbied. I think that's wrong.
Gentlemen, we have just a few more minutes, and so if you want to draw any conclusions here.
Well, you know, I'm afraid that if Joe Biden gets elected, that is a great fear. And the fear is not so much from Biden, but from the fact that he's an empty suit. I feel sorry for him. You know, I've watched him over the years. He's kind of a nice guy, but he's not effective. The fact is, if he gets elected, they're going to give him a strong vice president who's really going to be running it, and the staff is going to totally be running whatever he says.
I don't totally disagree. There's some truth in what you say. I have not been a fan of Biden in the past. He's run for president 3 times before. He's never won a single primary. It was an understandable choice by Obama because Obama was fairly new and inexperienced. He needed an old hand, 30 years in the Senate, Joe Biden, a longtime presidential candidate. So that was a good choice, and most people thought, okay, that worked out fine. But does that mean Biden is the best qualified candidate to be president of the United States? No, it does not, and he is not.
No.
And there's a lot of reasons why he is not. And we Bernie people think he's way too moderate. We need somebody a little bolder in this age and time to say that. And Bernie, I want him to move public opinion and have that bully pulpit and to really say things that
Bernie's done nothing. He's named 2 post offices. He's done nothing. He was a mayor. You know, the other thing that really bothers me about these people, none of them have ever worked for a living. I've always been government employed.
Not Steyer, not Bloomberg, not a lot of them came from the military. Tulsi Gabbard, they're all running for president.
I like Tulsi Gabbard.
No,
and they're forcing her out. They're not even giving her a seat at the table.
She's one of the few that hasn't dropped out yet. They all went in a rush after Super Tuesday or before Super Tuesday
to coalesce behind. Not a threat.
To coalesce behind Biden because they're scared of Bernie.
What do you think that they gave those people? What do you think they gave Elizabeth? What did they give people?
Nothing, but I believe that they had an ulterior motive to drop out quick because they were going to do bad on Super Tuesday and they didn't want the public, they didn't want to explain to the public why they did so poorly. They said, well, I dropped out the day before, that's why I did so poorly. And they also want to earn the gratitude of Biden, and most of them are supporting Biden.
Yeah, I can understand that.
I underestimated the vehement fear or anger or disgust with Bernie. I thought he was saying things that people like. The truth is, people haven't taken Bernie seriously for 5 years since he first entered the last race.
And he doesn't deserve to be taken seriously. Well, I think he's terribly detrimental to the whole idea of this nation.
I think he's ahead of his time. I think we would get less
of his...
Well, if he is,
then we're in deep trouble.
That's the direction we're moving. That's what young people are doing. We're becoming more and more...
Yeah, well, the young people haven't got the brains. Look at the debt that these people are carrying with no thoughts of how to pay it off. I've got a young niece, and I was out with her, took her out to dinner last year, and we were talking. I said, before you took first get your check, take 10%, put it in the bank. She had never done that. She's 35 years old. Well, about a year later, she said, oh, Uncle Jack, I'm sure glad you told me to do that because she had an emergency. 40% of the people in this country could not meet a $400 cash demand. That's scary.
What percentage?
40%. That comes from the Federal Reserve. That's scary.
I don't doubt it, and it is scary. I agree with you.
That is scary. So our problems are further than who gets elected president right now.
We need to re-educate the public.
We have to educate the public.
Well, that sounds...
But we've got a minute left.
But we don't have very much time left. We're going to have to close this up. It's been very, very interesting, gentlemen. So do you have a last sentence or two you want to say?
I think we keep saying them. That's fine.
No, you're great.
Thank you for bringing us together again.
Well, I'm Jack Wilkenson here, the Republican, and Greg Brockbank, our Democrat, and they always have a very vigorous discussion when we have them on Public Advocate. So we want to say thank you very much to the two of you, and we hope to have you again so we can have another vigorous discussion. And so this is good evening for Public Advocate.
Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you, Shirley.